You. Well, good morning. Congrats to your basketball teams. That's really exciting. I'm not sure where you all are from, whether you come from a big city, a small town. If you're anything like me, you come from a really, really small town. I just flew in last night from Ohio. The place I grew up from, we had one street light and more cows than people. I don't know your values, your dreams, your fears. We could be the two most different people in the world, but the story and the stories I want to share with you today, I think you'll discover that we aren't so different after all. I want you to begin by imagining with me a 12-year-old girl. She would get off the bus after school, run up her gravel driveway to her house, throw her lunchbox on the table, and go to the freezer to get a big bowl of ice cream. She'd take that to her beanbag on the red carpet in her bedroom. Her walls were painted pink. They were covered in ballerinas, Michael Jordan, and the New Kids on the Block. A little old here, okay. Well, every day, this little girl, she would do her homework. She would go off to practice for one of the sports she played. Then she'd go to her cousin's house to play Nintendo. Even as she grew up, she was really involved, in school and popular and spent a lot of time with friends. And in many ways, she was like the poster child of her small community. Straight A student, student council president, homecoming queen, all those things, and she lived the perfect life. And at home, things seemed just as perfect. She lived with her mom and her stepdad. Her mom and her were very close. Her stepdad was self-employed. They spent a lot of time doing father-daughter activities. And she also had a stepsister who was exactly 5 months and 5 days younger than her, and they were best friends. So perfect family, perfect girl, perfect life. Now I want you to imagine that same little girl wishing she were someone else. Imagine her planning how to run away from home. Imagine her planning her own funeral. This same girl, the perfect neighborhood, perfect family, everyone was so supportive, was afraid to come home each and every day after school. She often had horrible nightmares. She often woke up crying. So why the nightmares? Why the crying? She cried because she was miserable, and she was miserable because she had a secret. As you can imagine, I was miserable. I was the girl who came to school every day with the biggest smile on her face, but I was afraid inside. I had a secret, and I didn't know why I had to keep it. But I do know I will never forget the summer between middle school and high school. I was 14. I was looking forward to my freshman year, and we lived way out in the country. I already told you that. We had all those cows. And now I want to tell you a story, and you're going to think I'm a huge hillbilly, but that's okay. I know I'm in company here. I've seen some of you guys as you walked in. I'm just kidding. But actually, no. But we had this huge tractor that my stepdad had bought when I was little, and I learned how to drive this literally when I was just a little kid. That was like what everyone did. So I had to do the mowing at our farm, basically, of these fields and things like that when I was young. And I remember I was outside and I was going to drive my tractor and do my weekend chores. And it was hot outside, it was sunny, I was going to get a tan, things were cool. And I put my swimsuit on, and I was out there maybe 15 minutes or so, and I saw my stepdad coming toward me with a glass of lemonade. So I stopped the tractor and waited for him to reach me, and I remember I drank the entire glass, thanked him, and now the next thing that I'm going to tell you was totally off the wall and disgusting. And I remember that I would never forget it because he wasn't looking me in the eyes, he was looking me over. And now a woman knows when she's being objectified, and that's how I felt at 12 years old by my stepdad. So I gave him the glass back right away, and then he made this comment that made me feel really disgusting. I got really angry, so I took off, and I continued driving and doing my chore for the weekend and mowing these fields, and about an hour later, I saw him come back out and offer me another glass of lemonade, and I waved him back to the house and said I didn't want anything. And then a few minutes later, I saw him standing on our front deck, staring at me with binoculars, and I got so upset, and I started crying, and I tried to drive where there were trees so he couldn't see me, and I felt so small. And I remember feeling like I wanted to end the torment, because this wasn't something that just happened that day. It was something that had been going on for so long. And I wanted to end my life right then and there. I remember I was just fantasizing about never seeing my stepdad again, of ending it all. And so I put the tractor into the highest gear, And I was going to drive into this, there was this huge tree at the end of our field and then a big drop off right after it. And I was just certain that this is how it was going to go down. And so as I was driving faster and faster to that tree, the last second I swerved because I thought of my mom and how much this would hurt her. And obviously my life did not end that day, but neither did that torment. That summer, we were going to go on this dream vacation, the summer between middle school and high school. We were going to the Bahamas, my mom, my stepdad, my stepsister, and I. And I remember getting on the airplane and just dreaming about all of the amazing memories that we were going to make as a family. Because, it wasn't always that bad. Only to come back with some of the worst memories of my life. I remember swimming in the ocean with my stepfather, and as I came back to the beach where my mom was laying, she kept asking me what was wrong. But as always, I told her I would just tell her later. But I couldn't tell her. He said it was our little secret. No one would believe me, and if they did, that bad things would happen. So about a week or so after returning home from that vacation, my mom and I were in the car. We were going to pick up my stepsister to bring her home with us for the weekend. Our conversation started off as it normally did about each other's day. And I remember my mom was talking about some, dreams that she had for her life. She was wanting to go back to college. And she shared with me that on vacation, she had talked with my stepdad about these dreams. And that he got really angry with her and violent and acted in ways he never had before. And she turned to me in the car and she said, "Has he done anything strange around you?" Well, I was unsure as to whether or not it was really wrong. I even thought it was my fault. But I knew that if I were ever going to tell my mom that, this was the time. I remember we were sitting at the red light, and I was just sweating, and my stomach was tied up in knots, and I was just thinking about what would happen if I told her. Remember, the traffic light then turned green. My mom hit the accelerator. We were late. Then all of a sudden, I just told her. She slammed on the brakes and she pulled the car over to the side of the road, and that was the first time in my life that I knew it was wrong. "Did he ever touch me?" was her next question, and it was like all these things started coming back into my mind of things that I was trying to forget for so long. I remembered our summer vacation just 2 years earlier before I entered middle school, another family vacation I wanted to forget. In the pool and in the hotel room, and all of these different memories were just flying back in my mind of the words and the looks and the touches and all of the things that I didn't want to have to think about. And I remember it was the last night of that vacation, and my stepdad told me he needed to get some things out of our van and he needed my help. I was always a really good helper, so I went with him. He told me to hop in the back seat and look for the cooler. He hopped in the back seat too. He said, but that was really special, and he told me that if I loved him, I would let him. Well, I may not have known the answer to my mom's question in the car that day, but as I saw her reaction to these things that I was sharing with her, the answer was obvious to somebody today, but back then I didn't know that I was a victim of childhood sexual abuse. So often we picture this happening in another town, another campus, and another church, and another family, but the fact is that it happens everywhere, and it cuts across every race, gender, faith, culture, socioeconomic. 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused by the time they turn 18, and most of them will not tell. When I was a kid, no one ever talked about things like this, right? I had no language for what was happening in my home. And I didn't think anyone else would either. All I knew was what my stepdad was telling me, He said that he wanted us to be really close. He said that he was my dad and he was to teach me these things and that no one would believe me if I told. And he said that I wouldn't see my mom again if I told. He said that it was my fault, that I'd asked for it, and I believed I didn't have any choice. I felt so tormented as a kid, wanting to tell, not knowing if I would be believed, what would happen if they did believe, confused, afraid, silenced. Pain puts us into hiding. Well, in the car, my mom got really quiet, and she quickly said she didn't know what we were going to do, but she was going to figure it out. And so my mom and I left our home the following Monday after my stepsister went back to be with her mother. My mom reported the abuse, and we were told that he had denied everything, and we were to go to court the first day of my freshman year of high school. And I remember just crying with my mom and praying that however things turned out, it would be the best for everyone involved. The detectives told us to leave town because he was trying to find us. He was looking for us, and it was very scary. And I remember the Thursday of that week, we went for a walk through town. We were staying at my grandmother's house because we were staying at different places, trying to hide from him until the court date. And my grandma, sweet lady, I told her, I said, I really want to go for a walk. I was tired of being shut in, And so her and my mother, we all three went out, and we were walking down the sidewalk, and I looked up and I saw my stepdad's big blue van driving towards us on the street. So I yelled at both of them to run because it was him. And now Margaret is not your getaway girl. We'll tell you that. Grandma was not your getaway girl because her running was atrocious. And if I ever knew God was protecting us, it was that day. Because somehow the three of us made it to the library that was around the corner, and he didn't find us. And then the following Tuesday, we went to stay with some friends. And the dad took his kids and me to a shop, and as we came back, there was a police car. It was leaving their driveway, and I knew something was wrong as soon as I walked in the door. My mom was really quiet. She was sitting at the dining room table. I walked over to her, and I said, "What's wrong, Mom? Why were the police here?" She said, "He shot himself." I said, "He's dead?" She said, "Yeah." And I remember running around so angry. And I was just saying, I hate him. You know that after 10 years of being sexually abused, I finally found the courage to tell, right? And I felt like this didn't end the way that I had thought it would. And it took me a long time to work through that piece. I felt so much shame from what I had gone through, and then so much immediate guilt for how it ended. And I had to remind myself that I still did the right thing in telling, just like my mom did the right thing in believing me. And just like any school or church or institution does the right thing when they listen and believe survivors, and they don't sweep abuse or abuse victims under the rug to protect their reputation. That was a really hard time in my life. And even though I would no longer experience sexual abuse at the hands of my stepdad, I felt alone. I felt dirty. I felt damaged, ashamed. I felt like everyone was going to look at me differently. And so exactly 1 week after I vowed I was never going to tell anyone again. The day that I've heard about my stepdad's suicide, I said, I will never tell anyone again. I just wanted to bury it and move on. But it wasn't easy. I went back to school. Kids started calling me daddy's girl. The nightmares. I just struggled so much with trust. And I kept asking, where were you, God? And I knew I wasn't supposed to ask that question, but I kept asking it at night in my bed. Why do bad things happen to good people? I had so many dreams for my life, but I felt so broken. I needed to know that there was hope, that I not only needed rescued from my situation, but I needed to know that my story mattered. And so I want to tell you quickly about the day that switch was flipped for me. I lived for so long with so much fear. I struggled to trust. I struggled to get through the shame. I felt so hidden. I felt so stuck. I felt paralyzed in so many ways. But 1 year later, I was 15 years old. It was the following summer. I had this experience that really flipped all of that around for me. I'd kept my vow for a full year. I didn't even tell my best friend about the abuse. And I was invited by some friends at another school to, actually it was a Nazarene church camp. I usually say a church camp, but it was a Nazarene church camp. in Sandusky, Ohio. And the last day of camp, they had this time of open mic. I don't know if you guys even go to camps anymore, but they had this time of open mic where anybody could come up and like share something cool that God had done in their life, or, just testimony time. There's one girl who came up and talked about the boyfriend God gave her at camp. Like what in the world? So that's the type of camp we're talking about. She wasn't my friend. God did not give me a boyfriend at camp, but for some reason I walked up to that microphone. I don't even remember walking up to it, and I walked up, and before I tell you this was also the time, like ancient years ago, when people wrote with pen and paper. So we did this thing called pen pals. Have you heard of this? I know, it's ridiculous. We wrote with a pen and paper, and you would like put it in this envelope and like lick it and put a sticker on it, and it would take like 3 days to get somebody a message. Yeah, I know. It was like hieroglyphics or something like that. So old. Well, anyway, that's what we did at camp. So I get up and I tell my story for the first time in front of all these other teenagers. And it was just like it was here, crickets. Like, I felt like such an idiot walking away and going to my seat, and I didn't want to see any of those people again. And I'm like, why, God, did you like empower me or whatever that was to like tell my story? Because all those people know this about me, and I'll never have a boyfriend, And so I go home, and I am just in heaps of shame and hiding, and I am so mad at myself. But 3 days later, I told you the pen pal thing. I started getting letters in my mailbox. That's the other thing. It goes from one box to another, mysteriously. I started getting letters from other teens at this camp. They were telling me their stories. Dear Nichole, thank you so much for your courage. I too have been sexually abused, and I've never told anybody. And it was like, I was getting all of these letters from all these other kids. And for so long, I thought I was alone. No, I didn't want this to happen to anybody else. But I always thought I was alone, and for sure no one at that camp with all their perfect families wouldn't have gone through something like this. But yet I was realizing that I wasn't alone. And this was a time in my life when I was really searching God, and I was like mad at him, but I felt like I couldn't tell him that. And I would like at night cry, and I sat on my floor one night and I put all the letters around me, and I'm sitting there crisscross applesauce. And I did the thing that my pastor tells me never to do. I opened my Bible with my eyes closed, and I found a verse. And it was 2 Corinthians 1, 3, and 4. It says, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of comfort. He comforts us in all of our troubles so we can comfort others in any trouble with the same comfort we ourselves have received from God." And I knew God was comforting me, And here I was seeing this verse come alive, where I was writing back and forth with these other survivors of sexual abuse. And it was like the more that I felt that comfort, it was like the more I wanted to know him. For a long time, I was running away with my anger because I felt like I wasn't allowed to be angry. But then I realized, like, if God is this perfect parent, right, he would want us to come to him with our feelings. And that really changed my walk, because I got really real, and I realized that he was angry when I was angry. He cried when I cried. And it was like writing back and forth with these other survivors of sexual abuse. I was feeling as if my little flame, as hard as it was for me to tell my story, maybe it could ignite a flame for someone else. And I was seeing how there was so much pain in this world, but not so much that God can't gather it all up and use it for something good. And that really changed my life, because you see, pain, it puts us into hiding, but purpose calls us out. I think all of us will have divine interventions, intersections really in our life where it's almost as if God gives us like his vision of how he sees us, right? Like I felt like I saw how God saw me and not the way my trauma had made me see myself. And also where God will help us see injustice in the world in a way that maybe we could be a part of change. And we can either sit on our badonkadonks or we can get up, right, and step out of our hiding place and do something, because God really is doing a lot of amazing things in the world and invites us to do it with him. I remember after that summer camp experience at 15, I just decided I want to make a difference. I'm seeing how my voice can matter here, and I want to do bigger things, but I felt so overwhelmed by the idea of putting a dent in something like sexual abuse and human trafficking. It just seemed so big. I felt like an imposter. I wondered how in the world I could be used. I felt like a mosquito in a nudist colony, right? There's so much work to do, you don't know where to start. Yeah? Guys, that's funny. That's really funny. Dang it. Didn't work. But I realized that in my healing journey, it's looked a lot like I can't see the whole journey, but God will illuminate one step. And I would step into that one thing, and then he would illuminate the next. It was like this dance I was doing with the Lord. Nazarene Church. It was like this walk we were doing together. And but it was a beautiful thing without not knowing the whole thing. And it's the same thing with doing work when it comes to fighting injustice in the world, or something that you care about, where it's like, if you just do the one thing, it often activates the next thing, and then it activates the next thing, and before you know it, you've done this big thing that you never thought you could do if you hadn't started. We can all do one thing. And it reminds me of a handful of people in my life who decided to not just do church, but to be the church. People who weren't just wondering how I was doing, right? But they actually reached out and welcomed me, made space for me, listened, believed me. And because people like that showed up for me, they took that one step for me, God used them. And it's impacted not only my life, but my kids' lives and the lives of people that I come in contact around the world. How many of you know there's power in showing up for people? There's so much power in showing up for people. I want you to hear this, and I know a lot of you got an email today knowing that this topic was going to be hard, and still you showed up. And I just want to honor that, and I thank you for that, because I know that people who will show up in hard things like this and hard topics, you are going to show up for someone in your life when they really need it. I want you to hear this today. For the friends that showed up, you don't have to have all the answers to enter into someone else's pain. People in pain need to be heard, validated, and loved. I've had a lot of really great counselors and pastors in my life, and I'm so grateful for all of them. But one of them, I'm going to tell you really quick about the most important one. Not the most important one, I'll take that back, because the answer is always God, but almost the most important one that really made a difference to me. And I told you in the beginning, in my bedroom, there were posters and posters. I had a life-size poster of Michael Jordan in my room, and I used to tell him my memories. I used to tell him my story. When I felt like I couldn't tell my counselor, when I was afraid to talk to my mom, I would tell Michael Jordan. And you know what? He never had answers for me. He never told me what I was doing wrong, never told me what I should be doing, never gave me verses. What he did was listened. Michael Jordan was the best counselor I've ever had. Henry Nouwen once said that the friend who can be silent with us in a moment of despair or confusion, who can stay with us in an hour of grief and bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not healing, and not curing, that's a friend who cares. Sexual abuse is evil, and it leaves behind a lifetime of damage. But when we listen and hold space for people's stories, we're being a part of change. We're challenging rape culture. We're honoring the silent victims that are sitting here in your community. And I say that knowing that I'm not alone in this room. And for those of you who might walk in my shoes, I just want you to know that you're not alone. I know it's so hard to feel safe enough to tell your story. I too always believed that it was something that I deserved, it was my fault, or all of those things. And I want you to hear me today, something that I needed to hear. I don't care what you said, what you wore, what you drank. who it was with, why you were with them, what your community thinks about them. If you were sexually assaulted, it wasn't your fault. No one deserves abuse, and no one asks for rape. One of my favorite Bible stories is when Jesus returns to his home base. He was doing this whole preaching tour, and he comes back, and the news spreads that he's in this house. So everyone's rushing to this place where he's at, and it says that it was so packed that people couldn't even open the door, right? And in Mark 2, it says that while Jesus was preaching God's word there, 4 men arrived carrying a paralyzed man on a mat. So they couldn't bring their friend to Jesus because of the door, right? So they go up and they rip a hole in the roof and they drop their friend to the feet of Jesus. That love for the suffering friend is so inspiring for me. I just adore that story. And a lot of it is because knowing the circumstances of the man, he couldn't get himself to Jesus, right? He needed friends. We need friends. And we also need to trust friends. And the friends believed in Jesus' healing power so much that they were creative, they were assertive, they were persistent, they figured it out. And they got him there into that safe space, right, for hope and for healing. Proverbs 31:8-9 says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Ensure justice for those being crushed. Speak up for the poor and the helpless, and see that they get justice." I want to end by reading a few words from my book, Hush, which I hope you'll come visit me in the Commons. I do have copies of that book as well as my other books and some really cool hoodies. If no one sheds light on what's being done in the darkness, it will never stop. And survivors will never know the truth that will set them free from the lies that keep them in bondage. Every time we bring sexual abuse into the light, we prevent more abuse. We help victims heal. Victims need their own voice to break free from their silent pain, but they also need your voice. They need my voice. Together, our voices become one voice, one that rings loud and clear, speaking words of love, truth, validation, comfort, acceptance. Our voice will penetrate the darkness to expose sexual violence for exactly what it is. Our voice will lead wounded hearts to a safe, open place of healing. And as we speak out, and as we create safe spaces for survivors to share their stories, we will reduce the risk of abuse for the next child, and maybe your child. Thank you so much for holding space for my story today inside this church and for all the stories that are longing to be told here. I pray that they'd find a safe space to land. God bless you.